virtually. Again, my name is Carrie Forbes. I'm a liaison librarian of nursing. I actually work with undergraduate students at East Carolina University. We actually have two nursing liaison librarians. So I have a colleague who is also one of our two nursing liaison librarians. And I welcome all of you here today. This is not often a topic that you're going to see talked about, and it's not always very comfortable. So I just want to say thank you for being here today, and thank you for listening. I welcome your questions. I welcome you to chat with each other throughout this conversation. I look forward to reading that later. And I do want this to be a conversation. I am going to give you a ton of information today. It might be a little overwhelming, but I just want you to have as much knowledge about this as you can. And like the title says, we're titling this "Don't Fear the Reaper," discussing end of life wishes with loved ones. So we're going to talk about multiple things, and we'll get to that in just a second. You'll see here on the title slide, we have two little death reapers or grim reapers, depending on where you're coming from. Again, I meant to look this up. I actually gave this presentation a few weeks ago, and I meant to kind of look up some of the background on this imagery of the Grim Reaper, but I didn't. But I kind of love these two images because they're like, I feel like you're avoiding me. Why don't you want to talk about me? Hi there, which are not things that we generally associate with the end of life or death. And our dad joke for the day, we just have the Scoville heat scale there, but that's not the Reaper that we're talking about. We're not going to talk about Carolina Reapers today. And I am definitely the whitest of white girls and can't handle any heat on my food. So this definitely would not be in my kitchen, but maybe you like it. I do want to specify one thing today is that I am not an attorney and I cannot give legal advice. This is an educational session only. But I am happy to email with you, talk with you, text with you about any questions that you have that I can answer, either as a librarian or as a death doula throughout this conversation today. And afterwards. So please feel free to contact me afterwards at any time. I love talking about this topic, strangely enough. So let's start moving along. So a little bit about me. Um, Devin was kind enough to read an introduction that you can see here. I love Broadway musicals. I'm a pet parent. I have 6 cats and a dog. I have I don't have any actual children myself, but I have a couple of nephews that I adore, and I have several sort of adopted LGBT kids in my community that I mentor, and they're just really precious to me and make my world really full. So they are a big part of my life. But what brought me to this space and this work is that man right there, right under the word about, and that's my father. His name is Cody Lowe, and he passed away on December 22nd, 2020 from COVID, very traumatically, and it was a tough experience. It was in the midst of the pandemic. It was leaving my house in the middle of the night and getting to the hospital at 2 in the morning. And I may cry during this presentation, and I'm not going to apologize for that because that's how we talk about hard things and that's how we handle hard things. So I encourage you to that if you ever approach tears with this, please welcome them. It's just a release. But again, it was a very difficult, traumatic death for my father. And the next 2 years of my life were really, really difficult. I was nearly hospitalized from the profoundly tragic PTSD and grief that I experienced from that, and what happened after that. And many things happened during that time. For example, I didn't know where my father's will was. I didn't know what he wanted. We had talked about things here and there. I knew that my dad he wanted some of his ashes at least put into the ocean, and I knew that, but that's really all I knew, and I didn't understand how complicated the end of life could be, and not just death, but that time before death, because for most people, death is kind of a slow process. It's kind of a long, extended process. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but that's just a little bit about me. I'm really happy to say I got to see one of the very last performances of Sweeney Todd in the middle of there. And if there are any Heartstopper fans who are in this call, Joe Locke was in that cast. And so I actually took myself by myself on Amtrak to New York to see Sweeney Todd and came back all in a weekend just to see that one show. And it was incredible. And that's just giving you a little bit about how much I love Broadway. Okay. What we are going to cover today, we've talked a little bit about why this conversation matters, and we'll get more into that in a few minutes. Then we're going to talk about what are advanced directives anyway? Exactly what does that mean? And then we're going to talk about practical ways to how to have that conversation for yourself, for your loved ones, just how to bring that up for your friends. I mean, a lot of people I know, I don't have a huge extended family that I'm very close to. And so I've had to have this conversation just with fellow friends because it was the closest people I could talk to with. So I think this conversation really matters. But I also want to be aware that this is a hard topic. It's hard to talk about the end of life. And I actually used an AI generator to come up. I asked it for a therapy bear, and this is what it gave me. So we have our little therapy bear there, and just saying, be kind to you, take a break, take a breather. If you need to step away for a few minutes, please do that. All right, so starting on why this matters. We're all gonna die. I often hear in seminars about topics on anxiety or fear that, those top two fears are public speaking and death. But that's actually not true anymore. That's a really old statistic. And a newer statistic coming from a study done by Chapman University, within the top 10 fears are two things that surround death. One is the fear of a loved one being seriously ill, and the second is of our loved ones dying, which I think is kind of profound, that it's not fear of the person dying, but it's fear of losing those loved people, those people that we love, those people that we come to every at the end of the day and talk to, our friends, our family, our kids, our loved ones. So I thought that was really interesting, that just a general fear of death, especially for themselves, wasn't at the top, but fear for other people was. Um, but death is inevitable. It's a natural part of our life cycle. And in 2021, of course, COVID was still is a leading cause of death, but it still was underneath heart disease and cancer. And currently, according to a 2020 Gallup poll, only 45% of Americans have a living will. And one of the things that I want you to walk away with at the end of this conversation today is having a better understanding of what documents that you're going to need, because a living will is just one of them. So we're going to talk more about those in a little bit. A little bit more about why this matters. People are getting older and living longer. The average lifespan of Americans in 2023 is 76. My dad had made a will at like 58, but he hadn't really thought about any of those other documents that are also important. And the will was about 10 years old by the time he died, and circumstances had changed. There were just so many things that were different in his life, and because his health had been so bad for so long, even though COVID was really the final nail in the coffin, um, he just hadn't had the time frame or the thought to go back and change it, because a lot of things had needed to be changed by that time. So that's another thing, is that even people who might have wills, they don't think to update them. And one thing that I tell people who ask about, well, how often should I update them? Look at them every year with your taxes. Just do it, have it in the same folder with your taxes information, or even on your computer in the same area that you would keep information about your taxes. You don't even have to change anything. You can just look at them, glance at these documents that we'll talk about in a few minutes, just to make sure that nothing has changed. It's just a good time to do that. Currently, there are over 56 million adults that are over the age of 65, and most of us will become caregivers, either to grandparents, to older family members. It could even be to older friends who don't have family members. to parents. Many of us are part of that sandwich generation where you're taking care of children and your parents at the same time. So most people are going to be caregivers, and the older people get, the less actual caregivers we'll have. So there may be a crisis in coming years on having caregivers for our loved ones as they age, and ourselves. We're getting up there too. By 2038, the US could have more deaths than births. In 2018, there were over 92.2 million adults over the age of 55. And of those, 15.2 million do not have children. So what does that mean? Why does it matter that those 15.2 don't have kids? Well, generally, kids are the caretakers, right? It's becoming less and less the case. But it is something to think about that traditionally, at least in America and many other countries, that families kind of, you relied on a younger generation to take care of that older generation as they moved along. So that may be a problem in the future. So I finally want us to end by watching this quick clip from Barbie. And I hope many of you have seen the Barbie movie. If not, this was my favorite part. So we're going to play this very quickly. Fingers crossed you can hear it, and it won't be we won't have any problems. Just make sure that I do have that. Yep. Okay. All right.
This is a real rager, Barbie.
Thanks, Barbie. Gosh, this night is just perfect. It's perfectly perfect.
And you look so beautiful, Barbie.
Thanks, Barbie. I feel so beautiful. So do I.
This is the best day ever.
It is the best day ever, and so is yesterday, and so is tomorrow, and so is the day after tomorrow, and even Wednesdays, and every day from now until forever. Do you guys ever think about dying? I don't know why I just said that. I'm just dying to dance.
Okay, I hope all of you could hear that. And this was actually close to the beginning of this movie. And when I actually went to the theater and saw this, I had no clue what the movie was about, what was being shared. I knew nothing about the plot. I hadn't seen anything. And we were in a pretty crowded theater, and my husband, who sometimes I annoy him with how much I will often talk about my work as a death doula and end of life doula, and we're in this theater, and she says this, does anybody think about dying, death? And I mean, I literally screamed in the middle of the theater, and I was like, yes. And my husband just looked at me like, I can't take you anywhere. Like, just stop. So it was really exciting to me that suddenly in this movie that I had no clue what this was about or what this movie was really intended for, we're going to talk about dying. So I thought that was an interesting look at how people react when we want to talk about this. All right. So before we jump into what these documents are, I have one more clip for you, and you'll have to bear with me as I just leave this for just a second and go to, because we have to watch this directly on YouTube because it won't play. So I'm going to play this for you.
Telling my patients, your loved one, he is more machine now than man, twisted and evil. Let him become one with the force. And they don't listen. And then I tell them, look at me. Look at me. I did not have an advance directive. I am burned on 99% of my body. The Emperor resuscitates me. And now look. Look at me. Okay? Get your advance directive. Let them know what your wishes are, or you will end up like me. It's 90% robot. But who's counting? You know what I mean? It's a zero-sum game with robotics, really.
All right. Okay, I promise that is all the videos I will throw at you today, but I loved that clip. It was one of the funniest clips I could find that talked about why an advance directive was important. Because and it's about a lot of different things. So we're going to learn about the different parts of what an advance directive is. Okay, so I do have this we're not going to watch this video because it's long, but there are a few things that I want to talk to you about. And one of them is one of the documents that is part of the umbrella of within an advance directive is a do not resuscitate order. And when people first hear that it seems counterintuitive. Why wouldn't you want to, or why would you want to sign something telling people not to revive you through CPR? And I think it's really important for people to understand that, especially at the end of life, and this is not geared towards healthy people, towards people who, I'll go ahead and make this bigger again, towards healthy people, towards people who have a long life ahead of them. This is really more to speak on people who might have a life-limiting illness. Maybe they have had several bouts of cancer and they know, their doctor has explained that they probably won't recover. This is for someone nearing the end of life, okay, is what we're talking about, is that in those instances, CPR can actually be very harmful. It can cause physical injuries. It can cause fractured or cracked ribs, broken sternums. It can cause liver lacerations. It can cause brain injury due to the lack of oxygen during the cardiac arrest. There's a high risk of significant brain damage. The quality of life for people who survive CPR in those instances is often very poor, and they generally are not going to return to their previous higher levels of having a higher quality of life. And from the 2023 NPR study, and I actually linked to it here at the bottom of this, because this is a great video if you want to go back and watch it. And there's also this great article, and it's talking about the article goes into several things, but within it, it says that two bioethicists observed in 2017 that CPR has acquired a reputation and an aura of almost mythic proportions, such that withholding it might appear equivalent of refusing to extend a rope to someone drowning. But the true odds are grim. In a 2010 review of studies involving almost 150,000 patients, found that the overall rate of survival from an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest had barely changed in 30 years, and it was only 7.6%. And bystander-initiated CPR may increase those odds, but only to 10%. Survival after CPR for in-hospital cardiac arrest is only slightly better at 17%. And those numbers just get way worse the older that you get. So that's just something that I think is really important for people to hear, because I don't think it's shared enough when we're talking about CPR and DNR orders. So, oops, whoops, keep going. Okay, so talking about, now we're going to just get into some terminology here, and I'm going to try to go through this quickly so that you're not super bored, but just to help you better understand, advanced care planning is not the actual documents. It just involves learning and thinking about your personal preferences for your future healthcare needs, generally at the end of your life. So advanced care planning, this is for you thinking about your health care and primarily those needs that you're going to have right before you die. Advanced directives is just a general term for a set of documents that designate your chosen healthcare decision maker and your personal goals and values for your healthcare at that time, at the end of life. And I love this illustration of the umbrella, that you can just see advanced directives as the top of this umbrella, and it generally involves like about 3 to 4 documents depending on what you have and what state you're in. You're generally going to have a healthcare power of attorney. We're going to talk about that. You're going to have your living will. We'll talk about that too. You're going to have, you'll have, if you want it, you'll have your DNR or your do not resuscitate order, which is exactly what this yellow form is, and that's what they look like. And you'll have your donor registry enrollment form. Now, if you're in North Carolina, and I'm assuming most of us are, where else do you get information about your donor status? Where else can you share that? Feel free to share in chat. Yeah, your driver's license. So you're commonly going to have that already on your driver's license and you don't need an additional form. But for some people, this is really important and they kind of want to just kind of double check. And so if that's really important to you, I do have a link in this presentation for you to go and find an official donor registration form to include in your advanced directives. So just if you have not seen a do not resuscitate order, a lot of times you'll see these, for instance, if you have someone who is on hospice at home. So as a hospice volunteer, I would often go in and I would see people and they would have the do not resuscitate order like or like taped to the fridge or even the front door, just so that in the case 911 was ever called, they would not go ahead with CPR, because unless that form is there, they're going to try to revive your loved ones because that's what they're meant to do. That's their sole purpose, is helping people get better, feel better, you know, to save them. So unless they see that order loudly and clearly, they are going to proceed with CPR or other orders to resuscitate a person. And we'll talk about that more as well. A post is kind of like the DNR, but it's done by it's created for you by a doctor. It's a doctor's order. It's done in a hospital. It's generally for people who might be in a hospital. They may have a life-limiting illness and they don't have a loved one in that role of being their healthcare power of attorney. So that's often the case, and that's only done through a doctor, but I just wanted you to make you aware of the term. All right, so we're looking at this terminology, we're looking at the different pieces of advanced directives. So advanced directives can also be known as advanced healthcare directives. And sometimes it is incorrectly referred to as a living will. Just know that the living will is just one part of this set of advanced directives. It's just one document out of these 3 to 4. Generally, we said before, it's going to be a living will. It's going to be the healthcare power of attorney, the DNR form if you have one, and your donor registry enrollment form if you have one. So let's look more at a living will and why this is important. So this is basically your way to tell your loved ones exactly what you want at the end of your life. I so wish I had had something like this with my dad. I don't regret many things about my relationship with my dad. I had a great relationship with my dad. There's one thing I wish I could have changed, was I wish he had been more open to talking about this end of life stuff. And I was probably scared too. And I wish I had been more open about it. But this gives you the opportunity to have those hard decisions. So things that the living will covers is, because life support can mean a lot of things. It's not just CPR. It can also mean, do you want to have intubation? Do you want to have that medical device that helps you breathe? Do you want to have IV fluids and nutrition if you are unable to speak or if you are in a coma? It means CPR. It means blood transfusions. For some people in some religious organizations, this is a no-no. They don't want this. Do you want it? Do you want dialysis? Do you want antibiotics at the end of life? Because sometimes in some situations, you know, there's a point where antibiotics really aren't as useful as they could be for someone younger, for someone who may have a longer life ahead of them. So those are just different things to think about and different types of situations. And the thing that I like about the living will, and there are all kinds of living wills. And we're going to talk about a few of them. Like there's one here that's called 5 Wishes, and I know you can't really see that here. And we'll show a link to it in a few minutes. But the thing I like about the 5 Wishes is that it's in plain language, and it helps you understand those different situations so that you could individually choose which things you wanted. Maybe you're fine with CPR, but maybe you don't want a blood transfusion, or maybe you don't want dialysis. So you can actually go in and really kind of customize what is important to you and what is not, and why, and just think about why. Um, the living will also gives you options about the different situations. Would this be important to you now, or say later down the road? Would you maybe change your mind about this? I mean, like that would be big on the DNR order. Like I wouldn't want it now, but later down the road, if I'm 90, I probably would want the DNR. It also gives you choices on how much pain medication do you want at the very end of life. Do you want pain medication? Do you want nausea medication? Very often in end of life situations, as a death doula, when I'm sitting bedside, really the only things that you're still going to be treated for basically are like pain medicine, nausea, just to think those comfort care levels, things to make you feel as comfortable as possible in that time when your body is transitioning. And you can also choose things like personal care, environment. Do you want to have, would you rather have like a specific child bathe you, or, maybe you'd rather the nurse do that. Um, maybe if there's a time and you still have some unresolved issues that you'd like to talk about with certain people, this is your place to write down, I want you to have a meeting or phone call with so and so at this point, and I don't feel comfortable making that call until that point. But those are things that you can add to a living will. And I just threw this up here because I think this is so poignant, that the top 5 regrets of the dying, and this is from a book, and I actually have the link here to the image that you can go and find the book that this is in. But the top 5 regrets aren't necessarily that, that they're mad at people, or that they especially that they didn't work hard enough, but mostly it's about not having the courage to live true to who they were, to be honest about who they were in the life that they wanted. Wishing they hadn't worked so hard, wishing they just simply had the courage to be more honest in their feelings, wishing they had stayed in touch with a friend, and wishing they had let themselves be happier. And I really think it's the simplest things. It's not the stuff that we worry about so much as it is those simple things that are important every single day of our lives. So I think that's important. And I think it's nice to just kind of remember that every now and then, and just think about those things. Are you being true to yourself? Are you working too hard? Is there anything that you're not expressing that you wish you could? And as I heard in a previous session with the Black women, which was such an incredible session, and talking about therapy, this is a great thing to go to therapy with. If you are, even if you don't think that you have reasons to go to therapy, we all have reasons to go to therapy. And this is a great thing that you could talk to a therapist about, but it's also a great thing just to talk to a friend about, talk to someone you feel safe with about. All right, more things under that term. So I think we've covered most of them. Did we skip one? Oh, we did. I knew we were going to skip a really main one. So the healthcare power of attorney. Now, this was one, I got to admit, when I was learning about all of these documents and what they mean, this always tripped me up. Because I automatically assumed, for some reason in my head, that the power of attorney, the healthcare power of attorney, that was the person that took care of your will. That's not true. That's your executor. And we'll just clarify that later. But a healthcare power of attorney under your advance directives is actually 2 things. And it's easier to think about this way. I love this little diagram of Dr. Seuss's thing 1 and thing 2. Thing 1 is it's a person chosen to make healthcare decisions for you in the event that you are unable to while you're still living. So this is only relevant while you're still living. This is for you before you stop breathing, before that you are incompetent. That person must be 18 and they must be mentally competent. So 1, it is a healthcare power of attorney. 2 is the actual legal document that you sign that appoints that person as your healthcare power of attorney. And it must be signed, in North Carolina anyway, in front of a notary public with 2 additional witnesses. So just some helpful things to remember. Why would you, and just thinking out loud here, why might you not choose your spouse as your healthcare power of attorney? What might be a reason that you might not choose your spouse in that role? Or your partner? Any thoughts? Yeah, too emotional. It might be too hard. They might not want to let you go. I know my husband will not want to let me go, bless his heart. He probably would really struggle. Yeah, Vicky, maybe they're older than you are. Or they could be ill, they could be incapacitated, which I'll be vulnerable here for a moment. When my dad died, we did not realize that my stepmom was in advanced Alzheimer's. They hid her dementia so well that we did not realize that she couldn't even take care of herself. My dad's brain was fully working up until the minute he died. Hers was not. And so she was able to do a lot of things for him physically that he would tell her to do. And he took care of everything else by telling her how to do them. And that was such a frustrating position to be in because I had to make all these decisions, but I didn't have any legal power to do it. And so, yeah, that there are lots of different reasons. What it was really funny to me when I gave this presentation a few weeks ago at Joiner. Someone said because they might benefit from your death, and I thought this person watches way too much true crime. They're just like me. So I mean that could also be something you could be concerned about. But you guys gave some great reasons, and I think the emotional part is a big one. And that's also a good reason why it's so important to go back and look these over every year, every couple of years. You know, again, stick it with your taxes. Know that that's something that you would see on a somewhat regular basis that you could update as you needed to. All right, so I hope that there's no confusion about what healthcare power of attorney is. Additional terms to know: that a durable financial power of attorney is also something for you while you're still alive, but this has nothing to do with your medical decisions. This is a legal document that gives a trusted person of your choosing the authority to make legal and financial decisions for you, but only in the case that you cannot make those decisions for yourself. And both, I believe, for the durable financial power of attorney and the healthcare power of attorney, that decision that you were unable to make decisions for yourself, that would be made by a doctor. Like your husband just can't say, oh, she's not able. I have declared her unable to make these decisions. A doctor, someone in a power of authority in the medical world, would have to make that decision that you were finally in that space where you needed someone to speak for you. The other confusing thing is that there are a ton of other terms for both of these things. So for a healthcare power of attorney, you could also see that written as HCPOA, healthcare proxy, healthcare agent, healthcare surrogate, medical power of attorney. And for the financial power of attorney, it can be your legal agent, your legal proxy, a general POA, or a special POA, which are 2 separate types of durable powers of attorney. And those are instances where you would need to go to a lawyer and help him, or to a lawyer of either gender to help you figure out what all of that terminology means and if it's different and if you need to understand anything more clearly about that. Your will only takes place and is only would be in effect after a person dies, and it's that legal document that describes how a person's estate or assets would be distributed and managed. And again, an executor is the one who administers that. Okay, so I have Sophia over on the right telling me that that is boring. We don't want to talk about that anymore. Does anyone have any immediate questions about that terminology? Does that make sense? I hope that that helps you understand what advanced directives are and that they're not comprised of one document, just that living will. There's 4 things, generally 3 to 4 things. So I hope that that's helpful. Okay. So as long as we're good there, now what I want to talk to you about is where can you find this stuff and how to talk about it. So ways that you can find this information. So we talked first about planning, that planning is not the actual documents. For planning, there are lots of great places to go for planning. And my favorite is from the National Institute on Aging. They have this advanced care planning guide that I realize isn't probably going to show up. It's actually the picture. It's the picture here in the slide deck. It is a free guide that they will mail to you for free. I actually, when I was looking this information up, I found these, they mailed them to me, all free. It came really quickly. They also have it online as a PDF. And it's a great conversation because it's written in plain language. And what I really like is there are things at the back. For instance, they have a worksheet that says, who should I choose as my healthcare power of attorney? And it gives you questions to think about. Things like, am I comfortable talking to this person about my wishes and priorities? Do I trust this person? Can this person handle conflicting opinions from my family or friends and healthcare providers? Does this person live close to me or would they need to travel? So just things that you might not think about. There's also a great conversation about talking with your doctor about your advanced care planning because you want these documents. And one thing I don't think I added in this is that you would want your of course, your healthcare power of attorney to have a copy of your documents. You probably would want your close family members to have access to the documents. You would want your doctor and your lawyer. If you have legal representation, you would want all 3 of those areas to have access to your documents. So just lots of great information. They also had this really helpful, and I got some of my information from here, words to know. So there's like this great thesaurus that explains and goes into much more detail about a lot of things at the end of life that you may not be familiar with. So just really helpful. And the thing I liked about it too was it didn't feel scary the way that they talked about it. So I just thought that that was really helpful. Another one is, now this was geared towards ECU Health and anybody could access this. This is an ECU Health Advanced Care Planning Guide. But what I've realized is that most major hospitals will have advanced care planning for free available through their website. So if you have a different healthcare provider, look at your local hospital or aging facility. They will have free care planning guides. The Hospice Foundation of America also has a free guide, which is really helpful, and they have them for all 50 states. Very, very helpful. And most of these will tell you, again, these are guides to help you fill out the information. And they will, some of them have videos, some of them have podcasts, some of them have just different things to help different learners understand this information, and they're available in different languages. For the actual forms, for North Carolina, the NC Secretary of State has fantastic documentation for you. They have the separate documents, which I think is helpful because then you can choose exactly which documents you want to choose. Because some people may not want the living will. Maybe they just want the DNR form and they want, maybe they also just want to have a healthcare power of attorney. um, to help them with that DNR order. Maybe that's it. So you can choose what you want. They also have really cheap, it's like $10 a year, online cloud storage, so that basically you could just give your kids or your relatives a website with a username and password, and you could find that registry online. It would be super easy to find. You could just email it to them, and that way you wouldn't have to worry about people not being able to find your documents or your information. The other one I talked about is Five Wishes. I really like this organization. I like this one because it's not in that hard to understand lawyer type language, but it has been approved by law firms and lawyers so that it is sound and it's a legal document. When you go to this website, they have like a sample that you can print out. As long as you have filled out that information and signed it in front of a notary public, when you get to the part about the healthcare power of attorney, it still counts. You don't necessarily have to pay for that specific document, even though they will, and it's a low cost. It's like $5 or $10 for the PDF. They also have an electronic version if you'd rather have that. AARP also offers free options. And check your employee assistance programs, depending on where you work. Many of these have free documents or just a very low cost for these documents that have already pretty much been written up, and you just have to fill out a few places within them. So there are tons of places to get these documents for free. And I also want to mention not to forget your digital accounts, your digital legacy. We now have digital estates because we have all of our social media stuff. We have our Google Drive, our Google Documents, or wherever your iCloud. You might have, wherever you have bought, your music online or whatever, every place that you go online, whoever you want to be in charge needs to have a way to access that. And that's getting more and more complicated, especially like with the two-step authentication and things like that. But the link here in this slide will help you try to start to get that figured out. There are lots of ways that you can do that. There are some paid services that can help you with that. There are free services, like my husband and I share a Google Drive form that is just a simple it's just a simple Excel form basically that has the ways that we can get into whatever and how to get there, so that if one is gone the other can get there. So just things to think about. Again, when my dad died, my dad was a connoisseur of classic movies and music. We probably lost 20 or $30,000 worth of all of his stuff because he used Apple iTunes and iMovies, and we had no access. We had no way to access those accounts. So I was really heartbroken that I was not going to be able to go back and access all of my dad's movies. Another thing to think about is that my dad also had a really complicated setup for his television, for his computer. So my poor stepmom, we never did figure out how to reconfigure his TV and his stereo and how those all connected with the iTunes and the iMovies, and it was just a mess. We couldn't figure any of that out. And again, we couldn't get into his bank account because they didn't have a shared account, and none of us were executors yet. Or Betty would have been the executor, but it wasn't declared at that point. So I'm telling you, having these things in place ahead of time, especially with those important financial documents, the banking documents, and everything digital, please have that done early. That will help your loved ones out tremendously. All right, so now what we're going to talk about is just ways to start this conversation. One of the things that I really love, and I'm going to share a lot of different tools here that I like, is there's this free program called Death Over Dinner. And the hope of this is that it provides the questions. It kind of gives you sort of a guide on, hey, you could make this and this and this, you could watch this, and then it provides questions, and it tries to do it in a way Thank you, Devin. It tries to do it in a way to make it easy, to make it fast, to help you talk about it in a way that's not so scary. So that's just one thing to do. And I'm just going to scan through a couple of these things because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for questions and answers. Books, graphic novels. This is one of my favorites. What to Do When I'm Gone. Just a great book to think about how an adult can get through the death of a parent. Great book. Another great book is by Raj Chast. It's called Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant? This was just pivotal for me after my dad died. Really, really helpful for me. Children's books. Children's books for me, especially in the event of death, can be more thoughtful and give you as an adult a better way to understand your feelings and your complex emotions surrounding death than just about anything else I know. Really, really helpful. These are 5 of my favorites. These are just suggestions for things that you can do, different projects you can do. You could just say, I'm doing this for myself and you need your parents' help. How can you help me with this? So that's just one way to do that. You could visit a cemetery, just lots of different things that you could do. This is another set of booklets and books. This is by Barbara Carnes. She's a hospice pioneer and a nurse. These are great little books. They're written in plain language. I highly, highly recommend them. I give them to my clients. And lastly, there are things like these games, these card games that just have little questions on the back. You can play a card game and just ask some really hard questions. What do you want to do at my funeral? Just while you're playing a deck of cards. All right, I know that we are short on time here. So Devin, if there are any questions, I am free to take questions about any part of this conversation. I know it was a lot of information.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carrie. We have a question in the chat or the Q&A section now. Would you suggest a healthcare power of attorney for a college student going away to college? I have heard that over 18, if something happens when they're incapacitated, healthcare providers do not go to parents for decisions.
Wow. I've never gotten that question before. But if you would like to make sure to give me your name and a way to contact you, I will find out. That's a great question, and I don't know. I would think that as long as you're still under, you're still under someone's care, I mean, in some regard that wouldn't be the case, but I don't know. That's a great question. But I will look it up and get back to you. What other questions do you have?
Folks, feel free to add them to the Q&A section. We have a question about getting a list of these resources and links. So you will get access to these slides as well as all presenters' slides from the virtual day. Sometime this week, we'll make sure those are available to attendees.
Yes, absolutely. And you are also free to, I have a Google Voice number that I primarily use for texting colleagues, and you can feel free to use that. You can email me. This is an end-of-life doula and grief resources LibGuide that I created for our library that has a lot of these resources on it as well, and you're welcome to use that. And I also have additional references at the end of the slide deck, and you will have access to all of the slides. So I welcome all of you to use all of that information. I'm always available to answer questions about any of these topics. Okay, thank you, Devin. I'll write that down. What other questions? Is there anything that you learned today that you didn't know previously or that you feel like will be helpful? I know it's at the very end of the day, and this is probably the last thing people want to talk about at 3:30 on a Monday afternoon. Oh, thank you, Elena. Yeah, parents are so apprehensive, and that is one that I have found is that going to it from the direction of you needing help. Hey, mom, I'm thinking about this for myself. I really want to be prepared in case something were to happen to me. Maybe, and I'm always trying to be doing something. I'm trying to have something to do, to think about, or, you know, I mean, something on the table, something, um, maybe, and that's why I love the idea of playing a game or having a puzzle out, like, so that you don't really have to look at each other because it's hard to look each other one on one, eye to eye, because you don't want to be crying while you're talking about this stuff, even though that's okay. So many of us are uncomfortable with that. So I really like to tell people to ask for help, like to ask their parents for help, and in doing that, you kind of redirect the conversation to, but this is what I would like at my funeral. What would you like at yours? Is there anything in particular about so and so's funeral that you really liked, or um, there's just so much that people can do ahead of time that can empower them so that death isn't so scary once that you get to that point. And I think that that's what I've learned, especially with working with hospice patients, is that the families that have a lot of these questions answered beforehand have such, I don't want to say necessarily an easier time with grief, but it is kind of easier. There are just things that they don't have, that the children don't have to deal with. Like, you don't have to worry so much. You don't have to use all that mental space. But grief is something that I love talking about too, and I could do a whole session on grief support and how to help yourself through the grief process. Because I'm intimately involved with grief. So I think by preparing, you're helping people to plan on how they can be better at grief.
Carrie, thank you so much for this fantastic presentation and these resources. I know that we'll all be turning to them at different points. You've made it all so easy to understand.
Oh, thank you.
And thank you all participants for joining us in this last session of the conference. Be on the lookout in your inbox tomorrow for the conference feedback survey. We'd love to hear how the virtual day was, and if you attended the in-person day, any feedback that you have. But thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your Monday afternoon.
Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.